At 2:17 a.m. on a freezing November night, security cameras across London captured the most bizarre chase scene ever recorded. Tom Cruise was running through the empty streets of central London at full sprint, his breath creating steam clouds in the frigid air as his feet pounded against wet pavement. Behind him, a convoy of black SUVs and motorcycles pursued him relentlessly, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting their prey. What started as a simple dinner at a private club in Mayfair had somehow escalated into a 26-mile marathon that would expose secrets Hollywood never wanted the public to discover. But this wasn't about paparazzi, and it wasn't about fans. The people chasing Tom that night were far more dangerous, and what they wanted from him would change his understanding of fame, power, and survival forever. The evening had begun innocently enough. Tom was in London for the premiere of his latest Mission Impossible film, staying at the Corinthia Hotel under maximum security. His schedule was planned down to the minute, every movement coordinated with his protection team and approved by studio executives. What nobody knew was that Tom had been receiving anonymous messages for weeks, messages that contained information about his past that should have been impossible for anyone to obtain. The final message had arrived that afternoon, slipped under his hotel room door, despite the hallway being under constant surveillance. It contained a single photograph and an address in East London. The photograph showed Tom as a teenager, standing next to someone whose face had been carefully obscured. The address was accompanied by a time: midnight. Come alone, or the world sees everything. Tom stared at the photograph, his hands trembling as memories he had buried for decades came flooding back. The person in that image was supposed to be dead, killed in a car accident over 30 years ago. If they were somehow still alive, they possessed secrets that could destroy not just Tom's career, but his entire carefully constructed identity. Against every instinct and security protocol, Tom decided to go to the meeting. He waited until 11:30 p.m., then slipped out of his hotel through a service entrance that his security team didn't know he had discovered. The streets of London were eerily quiet as he made his way through the city, using skills he hadn't needed since his early days as a struggling actor, when anonymity was still possible. The address led him to an abandoned warehouse in Stratford, far from the glamorous neighborhoods where celebrities typically spent their time. As Tom approached the building, he could sense that something was wrong. The silence was too complete, the shadows too dark, and the feeling of being watched too intense. His Mission Impossible training had taught him to recognize danger, and every alarm bell in his mind was screaming at him to run. But curiosity and the need for answers drove him forward into what would become the most terrifying night of his life. Tom pushed open the warehouse door and stepped into complete darkness. The only sound was his own breathing and the distant hum of London traffic. He called out tentatively, "Hello? I'm here. Show yourself." The response came not as a voice, but as the sudden illumination of dozens of floodlights that turned the warehouse into a blazing arena. Standing in the center of the space was a figure Tom recognized immediately, despite the passage of 3 decades. It was Marcus Webb, his best friend from drama school, the man who was supposed to have died in a fiery car crash just weeks before Tom's first major audition. Marcus looked older, scarred, and filled with a rage that seemed to radiate from every pore of his being. "Hello, Tom," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of bitterness. "Surprised to see me? You should be. Everyone thinks I'm dead, including my own family. Do you know why that is, Tom? Do you remember what you did to make me disappear?" Tom's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. Marcus had been his closest friend, his roommate, his partner in countless auditions and rejections. They had made a pact to support each other no matter what. to share opportunities and celebrate successes together. But something had gone wrong in those final weeks before Tom's breakthrough. Something Tom had tried to forget for over 3 decades. "I didn't do anything to you, Marcus," Tom replied. But even as he said it, he could feel the weight of a lie that had been buried for too long. "The accident was real. I was at your funeral. I mourned you." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "You were at a funeral for an empty coffin, Tom. While you were giving your touching eulogy about our friendship, I was in a hospital in Scotland, recovering from injuries that were meant to kill me. Do you want to know who put me there? Do you want to remember what you did to get that first starring role?" The memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. The final audition for the role that would launch Tom's career. 2 friends competing for the same part. A conversation late one night about the lengths they would go to for success. And then, the decision that had haunted Tom's conscience for 30 years, even though he had convinced himself it was justified. Tom had sabotaged Marcus's audition by providing false information about the time and location. But that wasn't the worst part. When Marcus had discovered the deception and threatened to expose Tom's manipulation to the casting directors, Tom had made a phone call that set in motion events leading to Marcus's accidental death. "You remember now, don't you?" Marcus continued, stepping closer. "You were so desperate for success, so terrified of failure, that you were willing to destroy your best friend to get what you wanted. And it worked, didn't it? You got the role, you became a star, and I became a ghost." But Marcus wasn't finished with his revelation. "Do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 30 years, while you've been living my stolen dreams? I've been building evidence, Tom. Evidence of what you did, how you did it, and who helped you cover it up. I have recordings of phone calls you thought were private. I have financial records of payments you thought were untraceable. I have testimony from people who helped stage my death and who are now ready to tell the truth." Tom felt the walls of his carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. Everything he had achieved, every success, every accolade, had been built on the foundation of Marcus's destruction. The guilt he had carried for decades was nothing compared to the terror of knowing that his darkest secret was in the hands of someone who had every reason to want revenge. "What do you want from me?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled, and in that expression Tom saw the full extent of his former friend's transformation, from idealistic actor to calculating predator. "I want you to experience what I experienced, Tom. I want you to run for your life, not knowing if you'll survive the night. I want you to feel the fear of being hunted, the desperation of having nowhere to hide, the terror of knowing that everything you care about is about to be taken away." As if on cue, the sound of vehicles surrounding the warehouse filled the air. Through the windows, Tom could see the headlights of multiple cars and motorcycles positioning themselves at every exit. Marcus had brought a team, and they weren't there to have a conversation. "You have a 10-minute head start," Marcus announced. "After that, we come for you. If you can make it to Westminster Bridge before sunrise, I'll give you a chance to negotiate. If not, everything I have goes public immediately, and your career dies with the dawn." Tom didn't waste time asking questions or pleading for mercy. His survival instincts kicked in immediately, and he bolted for the nearest window, crashing through the glass and rolling onto the pavement outside. Behind him, he could hear Marcus counting down the minutes, his voice echoing through the warehouse like a death sentence. The chase that followed would become the stuff of legend, though the true story would never be told. Tom ran through the streets of East London with a speed and endurance that shocked even him. Years of performing his own stunts had kept him in exceptional physical condition, but this was different. This was running for his life, running to preserve everything he had built, running from a past that had finally caught up with him. Behind him, the convoy of vehicles began their pursuit exactly 10 minutes later, their engines roaring through the quiet London streets like mechanical beasts. Marcus had planned this carefully, using his 3 decades of preparation to turn the entire city into a hunting ground. They knew the streets better than Tom did. They had more resources, and they had the advantage of numbers. But Tom had something they didn't expect: the desperation of a man who had everything to lose, and the skills he had learned from years of performing impossible stunts. He used construction sites as obstacles, disappeared into underground passages, and employed every trick he had learned from his action films to stay ahead of his pursuers. As he ran through Camden, then King's Cross, then into the heart of London, Tom began to understand the full scope of Marcus's plan. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about psychological torture. Marcus wanted Tom to experience every emotion he had felt during his own ordeal: fear, desperation, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of knowing that survival depended on superhuman effort. Mile after mile, Tom pushed his body beyond its limits. His lungs burned, his legs ached, and his heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. But he kept running, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant the end of everything he had worked for over the past 30 years. By the time he reached the Thames, Tom had been running for over 4 hours. His pursuers had been relentless, sometimes getting close enough that he could hear their voices, sometimes falling back as he found new ways to evade them. The city that had seemed like a maze when the chase began was now as familiar as his own home, mapped out in his mind through pure adrenaline and necessity. As Westminster Bridge came into view, Tom realized that Marcus had chosen the location for symbolic reasons. It was here, on this same bridge, that they had made their pact as young actors to always support each other's dreams. Now, it would be the place where their story finally reached its conclusion. Tom stumbled onto the bridge just as the first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon. He had made it, but barely. His clothes were torn, his face was bleeding from cuts received during his escape, and his body was pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. As he collapsed against the bridge's stone railing, he saw Marcus approaching on foot, alone. "Congratulations, Tom," Marcus said, his voice now strangely gentle. "You made it." 26 miles through London in under 5 hours. That's actually quite impressive for a man your age. Tom could barely speak, but he managed to gasp out the question that had been driving him all night. What happens now? Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Now you have a choice, Tom. In this envelope is everything I've collected over the past 30 years. Every piece of evidence, every recording, every document that proves what you did to me. You can take it and destroy it, and I'll disappear from your life forever. But if you do, you have to live with the knowledge that you'll never know if I kept copies, if I told others, or if someday this will all come back to haunt you." Tom stared at the envelope, understanding that this was more than just an offer. It was a final test. Marcus wasn't just giving him the evidence. He was giving him the chance to experience the same paranoia and fear that had consumed Marcus for 3 decades. "Or," Marcus continued, "you can leave the envelope with me, confess everything publicly, and finally face the consequences of what you did. Your career will be over, your reputation will be destroyed, but you'll be free from the weight of carrying this secret." As the sun rose over London, Tom realized that regardless of which choice he made, the man who had started running the night before was not the same man who stood on Westminster Bridge at dawn. The chase had stripped away 30 years of carefully constructed defenses, leaving him face to face with the truth about who he really was and what he had done to get there. Tom looked at Marcus, then at the envelope, then out at the city that had witnessed his longest and most important performance. After 30 years of running from his past, he finally understood that some pursuits never end. They just change form. Whether he took the envelope or left it behind, he would spend the rest of his life wondering if his secret was truly safe, or if somewhere in the shadows, someone was still watching, still waiting, still planning their next move. The night Tom Cruise ran 26 miles through London had ended, but the real chase, the one that would determine how he lived with himself for the rest of his life, was just beginning.